Hey, is that folk music that you play there? What is that? How do you call that folk music?
I think it was Studs Terkel who asked Big Bill Brunzi, did he consider his blues music to be folk music? And Big Bill says, well, never heard no horse.
Shoo bob shooby doo doo booby doo dow.
And the shot rang out, bang!
Hot dog!
Don't hesitate! It could be your ticket to a new tomorrow!
Well, howdy, folks out there in television land. My name is Ralph Litwin, and this is Horses Sing None of It. And today we're going to hear some stories from a couple of fellas who are members of the New Jersey Storytelling Guild. And they're sitting right here with me. Ken Gallipeau, welcome to the show, Ken.
Thanks,
and
Ralph.
Jim Rohe.
Hi, Ralph. Glad to be here.
And these guys are not only members of the New Jersey Storytelling Guild, but they're also members of the Folk Project, of which I'm a member, and affectionately known as Folk Projectiles. Yes. And they're both also musicians, in addition to being storytellers. Jim, you have a band, your family band, the Rohe family band.
Right, Ralph. I work with my wife and my 2 children. And actually, when I perform for adults, I generally perform with my kids. And when I perform for kids, I generally perform by myself without my kids. So I figured that out. I don't know how that happened, but that's the way it works. When we work coffee houses, I'm with my daughter and son and wife. But I do mostly work with young children by myself as a storyteller.
Right. And Ken performs a lot of contemporary songs, novelty songs, funny songs.
A few love songs here and there.
A few love songs here and there.
As long as it's a good song. Like yours.
Well, thanks. So you have a story about storytelling.
Right, I thought I would bring a story to your show, Ralph, about storytelling, because I'm not sure if everyone in the audience out there is really familiar with storytelling. And I know that I often get a reaction when I perform to stories, and people are not sure about stories. They often hear me say, I'm going to tell a story, and they want to run. So this is the story of a man who had no interest in stories. It comes from India. Once there was a man who had no interest in stories, nor any interest in his own culture, his Indian culture, which I find that quite unbelievable. His wife, however, was very cultured and often tried to cultivate her husband's taste in the finer things in life, but to no avail. Now, once it happened that a storyteller was traveling through that village, and he had planned on staying in the village for 6 nights because that was the time it would take him to recite the entire epic, the Ramayana, the famous tale from India. Now, the wife heard about this storyteller, and of course, she went on the first night and sat right up front. As soon as the storyteller began speaking, she knew that she was in the presence of a genius. As the man spoke the words of the Ramayana, she had never heard them with such depth before. You could hear a pin drop in the room. The entire temple was full of people. That night, she went home and told her husband, "Please come." But he wouldn't hear of it. The second night, again, she went by herself. And after the second night of storytelling, she said this to herself: if that storyteller doesn't interest my husband in Indian culture, then no one will. She went home and insisted that he go on the third night of the Ramayana, even intimating that their marriage was at risk. So, of course, he went. Now, as they entered the temple, the husband right away stepped back from his wife as she pulled him towards the front of the temple and said, "Oh, no, I shouldn't be sitting right up front with you. Who knows, my first exposure to culture may be a shock to my system. I'll have to sit in the back." So the wife took that for an answer, and she sat up front. The husband sat in the middle of the temple. The storyteller began speaking. The audience fell to a hush. The man had hardly finished his first sentence when the husband lifted up his left hand, placed his left cheek in it, and fell asleep. He slept during the entire night of the Ramayana. And then, just before dawn, as the storytelling was ending, the audience sang a little canto, and they passed around sweets, which was the custom. Well, the person sitting next to the sleeping husband passed the sweet into his mouth, And that's what woke him. So when his wife came to retrieve him, she said, "So husband, what did you think of this, the third night of the Ramayana?" And he said, "It was sweet, very sweet." Well, the wife was very glad to hear those words. And she said, "Will you come again?" Well, you know, I did tell you that you could hear a pin drop in the temple. So the husband thought, "Why, of course I'll come again. I got a good night's sleep." So he agreed. So now the fourth night of the Ramayana came. They entered the temple. She once again tried to get him to sit up front with her, but he said, "No, too much culture. It'll be a shock to my system." So he let her sit up front. He went way in the back this time. He leaned against the wall, sat down on the floor, and fell asleep right there, his legs spread out. And the temple was crowded. And so a little boy who needed a place to sit was standing next to the man that was sleeping, sitting up on the floor, and he used the man's shoulder to sit down on. And the boy listened the entire night to the Ramayana. And just before dawn, the boy got up. The man was almost laying flat on the floor from the boy sitting on him. The boy got up and left, and the man awoke. His wife came by to retrieve him, and she said, "So, darling, what did you think of this, the fourth night of the Ramayana?" And he said, "It got heavier and heavier." And she said, "That's the way it is with the Ramayana. Will you come again?" Well, of course, he wasn't going to argue with his wife. Their marriage was really blossoming around this Ramayana now. So he agreed to go on the fifth night. But once again, he wouldn't sit up front with her. This time he sat way in the back. And the temple was really crowded on the fifth night of the Ramayana. There were animals walking through, lame people, lepers. The old man, the husband fell asleep right in the back of the temple, flat out on the floor. The storytelling, just before it ended at dawn, a little dog walked by. He lifted up his leg and peed on the man's head. And that's what woke the man up. He awoke to this pee running down his face. And when his wife came to get him, she said, "So what did you think of this, the fifth night of the Ramayana?" And he said, it was terrible. It was salty, very salty. His wife looked at him and said, "Salty? What does that mean, salty? What are you talking about, salty? How can a story be salty?" Well, she continued in this way for quite a while and finally forced the man to give up and tell her the truth. Now, I've thought about this part of the story and why this man told her the truth. And I think it was because of his general lack of interest in stories that he couldn't come up with anything better than the truth. So he told her that he had slept through the entire 5 nights of the Ramayana. She was furious. She said, "There is one more night of this story. You are coming and you are sitting up front with me where I can watch you." Well, what could the man do? The 6th night of the Ramayana came. She dragged him into the temple. She sat him right up front. She sat a few seats away where she could keep an eye on him. And now the storyteller began the last night of the Ramayana. This beautiful tapestry of tales was now being woven together into its final strands. He began. The audience fell silent. They were all engrossed in his words. The woman looked over at her husband. He was engrossed in the words too. He was wringing his hand with every word from the storyteller. Now the storyteller was at the beautiful part of the Ramayana where the great king Rama, he is separated from his wife Sita. She has been abducted and is on the other side of the vast ocean. So he calls on the leaping monkey god Hanuman to leap down from the heavens and take his signet ring and bring it to his wife Sita and save her. And so the leaping monkey god comes down. He grabs Rama's ring in his hand. He leaps over the vast ocean. But alas, in the middle of the sea, Hanuman, the leaping god, drops Rama's signet ring, and it falls through the sky into the ocean, deeper and deeper. And now Hanuman, he must find the ring if he is to save Sita. "I'll find the ring! I'll find the ring!" shouted the man. He stood up right in the middle of the storytelling and ran out of the temple. Everything stopped right then and there. The audience walked out. They looked. They saw the man dive right into the ocean. They all walked toward the shoreline. They couldn't see him any longer. And then the wife began crying. "Oh, too much culture at once. He was right. It made him crazy. Oh!" But then they looked up again, and why, they saw the man. He was swimming furiously toward the shore. And when he hit the shore, he jumped out. He had something in his hand. He opened it. And in the man's hand was Rama's signet ring. The people were amazed. They looked at that man. They looked at each other. And they began whispering, "Here is a man who has truly been touched." by the gods. And so they all began treating this husband like a wise man. And because of the way they treated him, he began acting like a wise man. And it wasn't long after that, he was truly a wise man. So much so that visitors that came to that village and knew nothing about the signet ring would speak to him. And they would tell the other villagers, here is truly a wise man of your village. And so I tell you this story now, Ralph, so that you may know what can happen when you really listen to a story.
I better watch out. That's a great tale. A great tale.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think we're going to take us a little break for a public service announcement. And we'll be right back in 1 minute with Horses Sing None of It with these fellas from the New Jersey Storytelling Guild. You can win this swell set of recordings by artists who have appeared on Horses Sing None of It simply by sending your name, address, and telephone number to me, Ralph Litwin. Horses Sing None of It, 140 Morris Street in Morristown, New Jersey, 07960. You can win recordings by the amazing, incredible Liza DiSavino, Dennis Dougherty, Margot Hennebach, Juggernaut String Band, Dave Kleiner, Ansel Matthews, Kathy Moser, Patrick Regan, Elaine Silver, New Jersey Songwriters Circle, and these 2 albums by me, Ralph Litwin. To win, send your name, address, and telephone number to Ralph Litwin, Horses Sing None of It, 140 Morris Street, Morristown, New Jersey, 07960. Ah-ha! Howdy, we're back with Horses Sing None of It, and we're visiting with some members of the New Jersey Storytelling Guild. And I thought I would sing a song that is actually a story from the point of view of the person who's in the action. It's a cowboy song, and it was a field recording from some unknown cowboy, and it has also been recorded by Glenn Orland, and it's called The Galdern Wheel. I can rope and... Oh, that's the wrong start of it. I can ride the wildest bronco in the wild woolly west. I can rake him, I can break him, let him do his level best. I can handle any critter that ever wore a coat of hair. And I've had a lively tussle with an enormous grizzly bear. I can rope and throw a longhorn of the wildest Texas brand. I can even move and quit in a band. I can... Boy, I really messed that one. I better start again. I practiced it this morning, too. I can rope and throw a longhorn of the wildest Texas brand. And in any disagreement, I can take a winning hand. But I finally met my master. He really made me squeal when the boys got me astraddle of that Galdern Wheel. It was a tenderfoot who brought it. He came wheeling all the way from this land of freedom out to San Francisco Bay. He left it at the ranch house to get on the outside of a meal, never dreaming that us cowboys would monkey with his wheel. Old Arizona Jim Begonia suddenly says to Jack McGill that I was a cowboy bragging way too much upon my riding skill. He says I find myself against a different kind of deal if I would get a straddle of that Galdern Wheel. Well, such a slam against my talents made me madder than a mink. I told him I could ride it for amusement or for chink, 'cause it was just to play things for the kids and such about it, and they'd have their ideas shattered if they'd trot the critter out. Well, they held it while I mounted, and I gave the word to go. The shove they gave to start me, it weren't unreasonably slow, and I never spilt a cuss word, and I never give a squeal. I was building my reputation on that Galdern Wheel. Now the grade was mighty sloping from the ranch down to the creek, and I went to Gallipeau like a crazy lightning streak, a whizzing and a darting first to this way then to that, and the darn contrivance wobbling like the flying of a bat. And the boys began to holler, "Stay with him, Uncle Bill, stick your spurs into the critter and turn him over up the hill." And as the boys went hollering and up the hill I went, it seemed there'd be a mix-up that I couldn't circumvent. 'Cause I pulled up on the handles, I couldn't check it up. I yanked and started and hollered, but the darn thing wouldn't stop. And a sneaking notion into my brain began to steal that the devil had a mortgage on that Galdern Wheel. Then the ground flew up to hit me, and the stars all tangled up. The next thing I remembered, all the punchers picked me up, took me to the bunkhouse, laid me out across the bed, and the cowboys gathered round 'cause they know that I was dead. And Jesus jousted with the prophets how I'd split the Texas air. He said he hadn't laughed so hard in about 100 years. And if I'd stick to critters and don't tear up the Texas sod, he'd send me back to earth here by the grace of God. Yeah, I've a sort of dim and hazy recollection of the stop, with the stars all spinning round and the earth all tangled up. There followed an intermission, after which I found I'm lying in the bunkhouse and the boys all gathered round. And the doctor there was sewing on the skin where it was ripped, and old Arizona whispered, "Well, old boy, I guess you're whipped." I said that I'm busted from sombrero down the hill. And he grins and says, "You ought to see that Galdern Wheel." The Galdern Wheel. Well, thank you. Thank you, boys. And right now we're going to turn the floor over to Mr. Ken Gallipeau. What do you got for us, Ken?
Well, there's a lot of stories. Always have a king in it. This is a story that has a king. But it's a story about a fisherman and a gatekeeper. Now, there once was a king who decided to have a big banquet to celebrate the birth of his daughter. This banquet was going to be bigger than anyone had ever seen, and they would talk about it for years. They would have all kinds of food, many, many courses, but the main course was going to be fresh fish, because that's what the kingdom was known for. Now, the king invited all the people from the surrounding kingdoms all across the land came, kings and queens. Now, the week before the banquet, they started to prepare everything ahead of time, all the food that they could, and all the decorations. But they decided that they would wait until the day of the banquet to catch the fish, so the fish would be as fresh as possible. Well, the night before, all the guests started to come. And after the last guest came, a big storm came. It whipped up the seas with waves so big they were crashing on the shore that no one dared even think about taking a boat out into the sea. Well, the king was really distraught. Here he had planned this tremendous celebration with this wonderful meal that would seem silly if it didn't have a main course. Well, he prayed all that night that the storm would subside. But in the morning, the wind was blowing just as strong as it was the night before. Well, he sat in his chamber, totally depressed. He didn't want to go down and even talk to his guest. When suddenly there was a knock at the door. It was the gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper announced that the king had a visitor. So in came this visitor. It was a fisherman. The fisherman was carrying 2 big nets full of flapping fish, water still dripping on the floor. And the king said, "What is this?" And the fisherman said, "Your Majesty, I knew how important this banquet would be to you, and how important the fish would be as part of the main meal. So I went out and I braved the storm so that you would have fish for your celebration." Well, the king quickly told his servants to take the fish and bring it down to the chefs so they could start to prepare it. And then the king, he embraced the fisherman and he said, "You have done me a great service. And now I want to thank you. I want to give you a reward. And you can choose the reward. Anything in my kingdom you may have." Well, the fisherman thought for a minute, and he said, "I would like 100 lashes with a whip." And the king said, wait a minute, I don't think you heard me. I said, I want to give you a reward. Anything in my kingdom, gold, silver, jewels, a home, a farm, a new boat, anything is yours. I understand that, Your Majesty, but I would like 100 lashes with a whip. If 100 lashes you want, then 100 lashes you'll get. So he told the servants to go out in the other room and give the fisherman those 100 lashes. But he pulled one of the servants aside and he said, don't you hurt him in any way. I don't want a single mark on his body. The servant agreed. The servant went into the other room and they looked at one another. They couldn't believe this fool had the opportunity for all these riches and gold, and he chose to get lashes. So they administered the whips. They took the whip and they laid it gently across his back. But when they got to the 50th lash, the fisherman stood up and he said, now wait, the remaining 50 lashes must go to the gatekeeper, for he is to share half of my reward. The servants couldn't believe it. The servants summoned the king, and the king came in, and the king demanded an explanation. And the fisherman said, well, Your Majesty, earlier when I came to the gate with the fish, the fisherman would not let me enter until I promised to give him half of the reward that I was to receive. And so as to not to delay the delivery of the fish, I agreed. Well, the king was angry. He couldn't believe that his gatekeeper would do such a thing. So he told his guards to go and get the gatekeeper. And they brought him up, and he said, take this gatekeeper down to the dungeon and administer the remaining 50 lashes and don't show any mercy whatsoever. And that was done. And after that, the gatekeeper was banished from the kingdom, never to be seen again. The fisherman, however, was given a place of honor at the banquet. He sat right next to the king, and the banquet was a great success. The fish was the best that anyone had ever tasted. But after the banquet, the king went to the fisherman and he said, now, what would you like as a reward? And the fisherman said, well, just seeing the joy on your face, Your Majesty, and the fact that all the people enjoyed the fish so much, that was reward enough for me. And that's the story of the fisherman and the gatekeeper.
All right. That fisherman is more of a saint than a fisherman.
Well, there are some of those saintly people who are fishermen.
So we have a couple minutes to talk here. We should let people know how they can get in touch with you, Ken. Mm-hmm. Ken Gallipeau, and they'll flash your number on the, there we go, I can't read it.
Ah, yeah, there it is.
539-4995, is that right?
4935.
4935.
I don't have my glasses on, you see.
Yeah, I don't either.
But
it's written right here on my shirt, so when you see me on the road, you'll see it.
So if you want to have Ken come sing, tell stories, whatever,
right.
That's the
For
number to
all
call.
occasions.
And in your real life, you're a computer consultant.
Computer consultant. I write custom software, and
So Ken, you've helped me out when I was stuck.
that's right.
With
Ralph
my
calls up on
computer.
the phone and says, "Ken, I have a problem." I said, "I don't know, Ralph. I'll try." It's a big world, and it's tough to know all of what's going on in that computer world. I'll tell you.
Yeah. And let's not ignore Jim too. Jim,
don't ignore
we
me,
should.
Ralph. Don't ignore me. Don't.
We should
You can't be
let
ignored.
let
Did you get me
Jim's
the little?
number.
Did you put a T-shirt
let's-
on me too?
Yeah.
There's Jim.
There he
Oh,
is.
there I am.
There's Jim.
Why don't you
Okay.
tell the people your phone number so I
Right.
don't get
My
it wrong?
number is 201-284-1985. I also have the family band.
The
Some
Rohe
of you people
family
out there
band.
have probably seen us.
Rohe
You folk
family
project
band.
members, hi.
They're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Your kids are great.
Yeah, yeah. So call us if you want a family band or if you need a storyteller, or also do windows.
All right. Well, we've got this interesting tale to end up with here. And I'm going to provide a little musical accompaniment. So I want to thank you guys for sharing your stories with us.
Anytime,
Thank
Rob.
you.
And also, if people want to get in touch with the New Jersey Storytelling Guild, if they're interested in learning how to tell stories or they've got some stories to tell, they should call either one of you.
That's
Sure.
correct.
And the meeting is what night of the month?
The first Sunday of every month in Montclair. And
At the Union Congregational Church on Cooper Avenue.
Okay.
So
know how
just
to get there.
pop in there Sunday at 8 o'clock and you'll hear us there.
let's see.
You want to tell them about the story?
Well, this is kind of a sea story. I guess I'm going to tell a story and then I'm going to pass the character off to Jim and then so on. We're going to go around like that. Now, it was a dark and stormy night. And the captain stood on the bridge and he said to his mate, "Mate, tell us a yarn." And the mate said,
It was a dark and stormy night, and the captain stood on the bridge, and he turned to his mate, and he said, "Tell us a yarn, man." And the mate began.
It was a dark and stormy night, and the captain stood on the bridge, and he said to his mate, "Tell us a yarn." And the mate said,
Well, it was a day when the sky was as blue as a robin's egg. And up at the lamasery in the high mountains of Tibet, the old lama said to another old lama, "Tell us a yarn!" And the old lama said,
It was a dry and windy night on the desert.
Imagine. The world
And
has
the
been
camel
shrunk to
driver
the size of a gymnasium. It's 6 billion people condensed to a room full of players. They're developing strategies and working together to solve the world's problems. They are all participants in a World Game Workshop. The World Game Institute offers workshops and software to provide people with information, to inspire them, and to empower them to become better global citizens and to have a better global understanding. If you know a group or a school that needs more hands-on work with world issues, please contact the World Game Institute. You can call or write us at World Game Institute, 3215 Race Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 19104. Our number, 1-800-220-4263.